In this lesson, we'll cover the basics of Dynamesh unions, which is just a fancy way of saying how it recalculates your mesh when retopologizing. So it's actually busted into three separate categories. You can either add to your mesh, take away from it, or find an in-between. This one is actually a pretty cool option. We'll get to that one last. First, there's add, which in order to understand any of these, you need to understand what a Dynamesh actually is. So this is a standard mesh, and as you can see, when you stretch the topology out, it can kind of get really clunky and just simply break. Now, if you're trying to sculpt this into a horn or maybe even a wing, you really can't. It's just not going to work out for you. However, the strength of Dynamesh allows you to retopologize the mesh, basically whenever you want. So if you need more geometry in a certain area, you just swipe and it recalculates and gives you more detail. It's a really cool feature. Anyway, so as you can see, it's all quads for the most part. You get some triangles in there, but Dynamesh is mainly used for base mesh creation. So you can go really high detail on this thing, but I don't recommend it because every time you swipe, it recalculates the mesh. So the more detail you have on there, the longer it's going to take. So if you start, stacking on some really high resolution detail, it's just going to get out of hand. So anyway, how exactly does add work? Well, you just seen it. What add does is it just recalculates. It adds more geometry to it. Also, if your mesh touches itself in any fashion and you recalculate, it'll actually merge the vertices, as you can see. It's pretty neat. And it works the same if you throw in another object. So if I click on this and say duplicate, okay, and I can merge the two together. Whoops. See? So you can add to it just by simply control and swipe. It's the same as clearing a mask, basically, because when you add a mask, you're holding control and you're swiping across the mesh. So you clear your mask, and if you swipe again, it retopologizes. And anyway, then there's also sub. Now what sub does is it takes away. So for this instance, we will be using an insert mesh. You can access them by going to your brushes and pressing I. So we'll be getting more in depth into these later. But to do this, you just put one in there by holding the Alt key and then press sub. Oh, you actually have to clear the mask and then press sub. And it takes away from it. Kind of cool. Okay, now likewise, if you have the same exact geometry in there and you press AND instead of sub, it'll find the in-between. Basically, it took this shape, the shape of the square, and it took it out of this shape. Whoops. And it took it out of your other geometry. In other words, where the two meshes touch, anything inside of this box is keepers. And that is how add, sub, and works. Again, we'll get into the insert brushes a little bit later.